weddings used to be like the ultimate happy ending. If you think about classical storytelling, Shakespeare's comedies, for example, the marriage is literally the bow on top of the narrative.
Right. It's the ultimate resolution.
Exactly. The conflicts are resolved, the lovers are united, and, everybody lives happily ever after. But in modern storytelling, that concept of forever has really morphed into this literal source of unrelenting terror.
Oh, absolutely.
Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're unpacking a massive cultural shift by looking at the new 8-episode Netflix thriller, Something Very Bad Is Going to Happen. We're going to see exactly how it weaponizes our societal fear of commitment and, honestly, completely reinvents a modern horror trope. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Tracing the lineage of that cultural shift is actually a fascinating place to start, because you can argue that this modern obsession with, wedding-related terror really crystallized in the mainstream with the infamous Red Wedding in Game of Thrones.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
That was traumatizing.
Right. It was this massive watershed cultural moment where a celebration of union was just subverted into an absolute massacre.
Literally.
And since then, wedding horror hasn't just been like a one-off shock tactic. It has evolved into a fully fledged genre trope in its own right. We are collectively fascinated by the idea of the happiest day of your life turning into a total nightmare.
And the creative muscle behind this new show clearly knows how to play with those exact cultural anxieties. I mean, we are talking about a series produced by the Duffer Brothers, the minds behind Stranger Things.
Yeah, it's huge.
With Haley Z. Boston acting as the showrunner. So right out of the gate, you are in for a highly polished, incredibly tense weekend binge.
For sure.
But to really understand how this show shatters the rules of modern horror, we need to establish the specific architecture of the tropes it's playing with, right?
Yeah, you really have to understand the house before you can appreciate how the showrunner is tearing it down.
Right.
And the foundation here is the core couple. We have Rachel, who's played by Camila Morona, and Nikki, played by Adam DeMarco.
Which, great casting, by the way.
Oh, incredible casting. So Rachel is this deeply troubled bride-to-be. She has this profound, deep-seated aversion to marriage, which is rooted in an obscure and tragic past that we sort of slowly uncover as the show goes on.
Yeah, she really had to fight her own nature just to accept Nikki's proposal.
Exactly. And Nikki, conversely, is the quintessential golden retriever fiance. I mean, he comes from immense money, he's deeply in love, and he has this naive puppy dog optimism about their future together.
Which is so endearing, but also sets up the inciting incident perfectly.
Oh.
Because it's classic, right? They're traveling to Nikki's family home so Rachel can finally meet the in-laws, the sprawling Cunningham family.
Right, the classic setup.
And the setting is where those familiar tropes really begin to stack up. At first glance, you are handed all the classic genre elements. You have the idyllic, imposing lodge surrounded by nothing but open road and heavy snow.
Yeah, the geography itself is basically designed as a trap.
Exactly. You are entirely cut off from the herd.
And beyond the physical isolation, there is a profound social isolation at play here. This introduces the trope of the imposing, impossibly wealthy family.
Oh, yes.
Because there's a very specific psychology to the isolated wealthy estate dynamic. Extreme wealth acts as a buffer against normal societal rules.
Right. They just operate differently.
Well, completely. So when the Cunningham family acts bizarrely, when they engage in these cryptic conversations or exhibit strange, sort of insulated family rituals, Rachel and you as the audience don't know how to calibrate your reaction.
You're just constantly second-guessing it.
Exactly. You are constantly forced to evaluate, is there an active, perhaps occult threat here, or is this just eccentric billionaire behavior?
Are they a demonic cult? Or do they just lack a basic social filter because their money means no one has ever told them no?
Precisely.
And that ambiguity captures that universal dread of meeting the in-laws for the first time, but, cranked up to an absolute 11. It feels a lot like walking into a video game boss battle.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right. Think about it. You walk through the mist into this massive, unfamiliar arena, in this case, this sprawling, snowy lodge, and you immediately know you are wildly underleveled.
You have no idea what you're doing.
You don't know the rules of engagement yet. You don't know the attack patterns of these incredibly wealthy, strange people, and you just feel entirely out of your depth.
Ew.
Every conversation feels like you are checking your emotional inventory, desperately trying to figure out how to survive dinner without setting off a landmine.
And that boss battle setup has been a massive engine for recent box office hits. I mean, this dynamic perfectly mirrors films like 2019's Ready or Not, or 2022's The Invitation.
Oh, yeah.
In all those narratives, the audience is presented with a central, lingering question. Is the threat to the couple's marital bliss a literal external monster, like a family of vampires or a satanic pact? Or is the threat something far more disturbing coming from within the relationship itself?
And that familiar dread, that comfortable, I know exactly what kind of horror movie I'm watching feeling, is exactly where showrunner Haley Z. Boston wants you to sit. Because once you get comfortable in that arena, she completely changes the game.
She really does, and her pedigree is crucial to understanding this pivot. Because Boston previously worked on Brand New Cherry Flavor, which was a wildly inventive, surreal body horror miniseries on Netflix.
Oh, that show was wild.
It really was. So she brings a clear history of refusing to settle for the expected. She is not a creator who is content with delivering a paint-by-numbers story, even if those familiar tropes are highly entertaining. She uses the familiar to build trust, specifically so she can break it.
Let's actually talk about how she breaks it, because the mechanics of this twist are what make the show so fascinating to me. The first few episodes are this deliberate, meticulous trick. The camera lingers on strange basement doors. You hear whispered conversations down dark hallways.
Yeah, all the classic cues.
Right. You sit back on your couch and think, I get it. This is the classic tale of a demonic family preparing to sacrifice its newest member. I know how to watch this. But then the rug pull happens.
Yeah.
And the twist isn't the reveal of a terrifying demon. The twist is the complete absence of one.
That is the pivotal shift right there. Because the show slowly reveals that the family isn't harboring a supernatural secret at all. They are just a deeply eccentric, insulated family dealing with their own mundane, complicated dynamics.
Yeah.
The actual monster is Rachel's own deep-seated trauma and paranoia deteriorating her sanity. She is so terrified of commitment, so terrified of merging her life with these strangers, that her mind is actively projecting horror onto completely neutral events.
It's crazy. The narrative fundamentally morphs from a supernatural survival horror into a deeply unsettling psychological thriller about self-destruction. Rachel is sabotaging the weekend herself.
She really is.
Now, I have to admit, when I first looked at the breakdown of this narrative shift, I thought it was incredibly risky. Well, here's where it gets really interesting, but also a bit risky. If you are a showrunner and you lure an audience in with the promise of a familiar, high-stakes, demonic torture fest, but then you abandon that external threat halfway through, don't you risk seriously frustrating the audience who showed up for exactly that?
I can see that.
It feels a bit like buying a ticket for a massive roller coaster, and halfway up the first 200-foot drop, the car stops and it suddenly turns into a cerebral escape room. Like, I might be a little annoyed. I came for the drop.
Right. It is a massive gamble. But I'd argue it pays off precisely because it doesn't alienate the audience. It actually elevates the dread to a much more invasive level.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, think about it this way. When you are fighting a demon, you know the rules. You find the holy water, you outsmart the cult, you survive until dawn.
Right, there's a playbook.
Exactly. It's an external threat, which means you have armor. But by removing that predictable monster, the show strips away your armor entirely. It forces you into a state of deep, unpredictable psychological terror. You are no longer watching someone outrun a monster. You are watching someone fail to outrun their own mind. And fighting your own mind has no rules.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that reframes the whole experience. Because when the boogeyman is clearly defined, there's a strange comfort in it. The parameters of survival are clear.
Exactly.
But when you realize the protagonist is the architect of her own nightmare, the tragedy feels inescapable. However, to pull off a psychological shift like that without relying on cheap tropes, you can't rely on cartoonish two-dimensional villains, right?
Yeah, not at all.
Like, if the in-laws are just mustache-twirling rich people, the psychological nuance completely falls flat. You need an incredibly grounded cast of characters to make the audience actually doubt themselves alongside Rachel.
Which brings us to how the Cunningham family is actually constructed. Because the character work here is a masterclass in defying expectations. A perfect example of this subversion is Nell Cunningham, the sister-in-law, played by Carla Crome.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought up Nell. Because the way her character is utilized initially confused me a little bit.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Usually in this specific genre, the other woman who married into the family is your primary antagonist. She's the gatekeeper. She's the one hazing the new bride. So why would the showrunner make her a steady, grounding, genuinely supportive presence? Doesn't making the sister-in-law nice actually deflate the horror?
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? But it actually achieves the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Because if Nell were a cruel, cliché gatekeeper, then Rachel's spiraling anxiety would be entirely justified.
Oh, right. She'd have a reason to be freaked out.
Exactly. She would have a tangible, external enemy to fight against. But by making Nell genuinely kind and empathetic, by making her this beacon of reality in this bizarre environment, the show brutally removes Rachel's excuse to panic. It isolates Rachel in her own madness.
Right.
It signals to the audience that the threat isn't this family. The threat is that Rachel is fundamentally incapable of accepting a supportive environment. It makes her psychological unraveling so much more tragic.
That is brilliant. It turns kindness into a magnifying glass for the protagonist's trauma.
Exactly.
And we see similar layered approach with Jules, Nikki's older brother, played by Jeff Willsbush. He enters the story fitting perfectly into that initial, superficial reading of the show.
Oh, yeah. He's very intense.
Right. He has this incredibly foreboding, uncomfortable presence. You're practically trained by other movies to expect him to be the primary antagonist, like the one leading the imaginary cult.
Totally.
But as the show accelerates toward its finale, the writing gradually strips away that intimidation to reveal these softer, highly vulnerable, and deeply complicated layers to his personality. He isn't a monster. He's just a flawed human being.
And the matriarch of the family, Victoria, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, receives the exact same meticulous treatment.
Oh, she's fantastic in this.
So good. She steps into the narrative with an incredibly sharp, intimidating demeanor. She is the classic, terrifying, rich mother-in-law who scrutinizes every single move Rachel makes.
Yeah, she is terrifying at first.
But the show invests time in showing us the full spectrum of her character. We get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. We see a woman who is fiercely protective of her son, dealing with her own familial grief and complexities. She is revealed to be far more than just a two-dimensional hurdle for the bride to overcome.
And by spending that time getting to know these people beyond their superficial wealthy family labels, the show makes a huge emotional wager with the viewer. Because if the Cunninghams aren't just cartoon villains waiting in a haunted house, then the impending doom that the title promises, the absolute guarantee that something very bad is going to happen, feels significantly more devastating.
It completely changes the stakes.
It really does.
Yeah.
It's no longer a fun slasher film where you are taking bets on who gets picked off next. It makes the horror incredibly complicated to untangle because you actually start to understand and perhaps even empathize with the very people Rachel is entirely terrified of.
And that dynamic shifts the entire weight of the narrative, because if the family isn't the cartoonish source of the tension, the engine of the dread has to be located entirely within the protagonist.
Yes.
Rachel is essentially acting as a walking, ticking time bomb right in the middle of this isolated snowy lodge, and the family has no idea they are sitting next to the explosive.
The nuances of the family are incredible, but it is abundantly clear that Camilla Morrone's performance is what actually detonates the show. Her portrayal of Rachel is the beating, anxious heart of the entire series.
It's an unbelievable performance.
Every single interaction she has is dripping with this weary, palpable heaviness. You can literally see the physical toll her internal paranoia is taking on her posture.
Yeah, and we have to keep Rachel's broader context in mind to fully appreciate what she's doing there. This is a woman bringing an immense amount of unresolved, obscure trauma into an already high-stakes, stressful environment.
Right.
The fear of abandonment, the terror of vulnerability, the exact reasons she avoided commitment for so long in the first place are all bubbling to the surface. She is carrying the crushing weight of her own psychological deterioration while desperately trying to project the image of a happy, carefree bride to a family she barely knows.
You know, the best way to visualize what Moroni's doing in this role is to imagine watching someone using their entire body weight to hold a heavy oak door shut.
Okay, yeah.
And on the other side of that door is some massive, terrifying monster trying to break in. She is holding that door shut with her back, sweating, trembling, her muscles are failing. But at the same time, she is turning to face a polite dinner party in the room, holding a glass of champagne, smiling, and desperately pretending everything is totally fine.
That is such a good image.
Right. And you, as the viewer, can see the door hinges starting to splinter. You can see her knees buckling under the pressure. And as the narrative brilliantly establishes early on, it's not a matter of if it all comes crashing down for Rachel, it's simply a terrifying matter of when.
That is a visceral, spot-on way to describe the viewing experience. And it speaks directly to how Haley Z. Boston manages the pacing of the show. Because you are constantly waiting for those hinges to snap, for her knees to finally buckle. The experience is excruciating.
It's so stressful.
The tension is absolutely relentless. It feels like there's a knife held to your throat through all 8 episodes.
Which is exactly why it smuggles a devastating psychological drama inside the highly bingeable, candy-coated wrapper of a thriller. It literally forces you to click next episode because the unresolved tension becomes unbearable. You have to know what the fallout looks like when that door finally gives way.
And Boston is utterly ruthless with that pacing. Even when she allows the audience a brief moment to breathe, these very rare, fleeting stabs of genuine joy or connection between Rachel and Nikki, or maybe a moment of authentic warmth with the family, she refuses to let you get completely comfortable.
Never.
The specter of Rachel's inevitable breaking point is always hovering right at the edge of the frame. The title of the show operates as a lingering threat. It isn't a suggestion, it's a promise. Something very bad is going to happen, and you are entirely powerless to stop it.
So what does this all mean? And when you step back and look at the sheer mechanics of what this series accomplishes, something very bad is going to happen proves it is far more than your standard weekend horror binge. It is an absolute masterclass in weaponizing audience expectations against them. It uses the familiar, comfortable tropes of the in-law survival genre to lure you in, only to swap out those superficial jump scares for a complex, grounded human tragedy. By centering the dread on a protagonist who is slowly collapsing under the weight of her own mind, it delivers an experience that is genuinely, deeply terrifying because it feels so entirely possible.
It is a remarkable achievement, not just as a thriller, but as a profound character study wrapped in the aesthetic of horror.
If you are a viewer who is, frankly, exhausted by the genre, if you hate feeling like you're just watching flat, predictable caricatures run through a haunted house, this series is for you. If you crave a narrative that actually respects your intelligence, subverts your expectations, and builds relentless, character-driven dread, these 8 episodes are going to be a phenomenal investment of your time.
They really are. And, it represents a fascinating evolution of how we tell these stories. And as we wrap up this analysis, it leaves us with a lingering, somewhat uncomfortable thought to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, we've been discussing how the show uses the prospect of marriage as the ultimate pressure cooker. But we have to remember that fiction is almost always a funhouse mirror reflecting our own reality.
Right.
So what does our growing collective cultural obsession with turning weddings into literal horror stories actually say about us? It suggests a deep, pervasive, modern societal anxiety regarding commitment. It points to a profound fear of vulnerability.
Yeah.
The true horror isn't demons or cults. It's the terrifying, very real-world prospect of permanently merging your life, your hidden traumas, and your deepest insecurities with a stranger's family, and realizing there is no turning back.
Wow. It really makes you look at that classic Shakespearean ending entirely differently. You used to be able to just cue the romantic music and fade to black on the happy couple. But now it feels like the moment they say, "I do," you're just waiting for the boss battle music to start playing, and you realize you are completely out of your depth, holding that heavy oak door shut, waiting for your own mind to break through.